Erica Zukama and Kaelin Geiger have left the Texas Tech program, but there are a number of promising young wide receivers ready to take center stage in the 2022 season for Texas Tech. I'll take a look at who those are and who I project to lead the team in receiving on today's episode of Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to today's episode of Locked On Texas Tech. It is a nice Thursday afternoon here. I'm your host, Emory Lyda, back again talking about football previews. If you have not checked out our position previews, you can check out our previous ones. The quarterback preview is posted up on the YouTube as well as the running back. So do check both of those out. There are quite a lot of interesting insights and information I have on those two podcasts. So you check those out. We're going to continue to go through the position groups all the way up until the start of the 2022 football season. And as well as that, we also have the game previews that I'm doing during the offseason that will be coming out over the course of the next few weeks. I actually got one with Locked On Longhorns and with Texas, previewing the Texas Tech-Texas football game coming up tomorrow. So do stay tuned for that. It's going to be nice with Jonathan Davis. And then next week, we're going to have one with the Locked On Wolfpack for the NC State game. Apologies for getting that mixed up, but that is going to be how we're going to do that. But in the meantime, today we're going to be taking a look at the wide receiver position. Now, as I mentioned in the initial opening, two of the main wide receivers for Texas Tech from last season are gone now. You have Erica Zukama, who is now on the Miami Dolphins. He was selected in the fourth round, if I remember correctly. I think it was the fourth round, yeah. So as Zukama was drafted, you have Kaelin Geiger, who also is off to professional football as well. Those were your two leading receivers from last year. So both of those guys played on the outside, got a lot of starts. That's Zukama and Geiger. Both of them struggled through a little bit of injuries over the course of the season, and that allowed for some of the other guys on the outside to get some targets, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But those were your two leading receivers. And then you had Myles Price, who is the top returning receiver from last year. He had 523 yards on 38 catches. He is coming into his third year in the slot. He's played a significant role both years, even though I don't think he started every game in either season. I remember for sure in 2020, he kind of took a little bit of a backseat to Dalton Rigdon, for example. And then as well as that this past season, you've seen him kind of have to split roles with guys like McLean Mannix. You saw Rigdon get in there as well, and then a little bit of Geiger getting played in the slot to go along with that. So it'll be interesting to see what Price can do this year as kind of the main slot guy. And then behind them, you lose Travis Kuntz, who is your main tight end. You still have Mason Tharp, though, who had a really strong freshman season, almost caught 200 yards worth of passes. And then it's just a host of guys who had anywhere between 5 and 10 or 5 and 12 catches. Guys like Willie Fungi come back. Trey Cleveland is back. You've got Jerome Bradley is back. JJ Sparkman is back. All of those guys on the outside had production from last year, and really receiving was one of the strong suits of Tech's team. They were able to generate quite a lot of downfield passes. If you look down the list of receivers, I mean, you look at Zukama and Geiger, both had deep passes that they caught for touchdowns. Price obviously had a 48-yard touchdown catch as well and had multiple deep balls. Fungi had a really nice game. I believe it might have been against West Virginia. You had Trey Cleveland. Cleveland was a good intermediate threat for you, and of all the wide receivers on the outside, looked to be the most dependable last season. And then Jerome Bradley and JJ Sparkman both had big catches in the bowl game. Sparkman with a touchdown, Bradley with a long downfield pass. So all of those guys had some explosiveness. And then with that, you had Zukama kind of emerge as your main guy as a receiver. Could do everything, kind of tapered off from a production standpoint later on in the season. I think that was due to two things, both the injuries and as well as that the rotating door at quarterback because of Henry Colombi having a little bit of struggles, as well as Donovan Smith kind of struggling a little bit to build some chemistry. But still, I mean, Zukama was a guy that you're going to miss coming into the season. But when you're looking at this team and the production from last year, Myles Price is the one name that really sticks out in the receiving room. I mean, slot receiver, someone that last year kind of started the season off a little bit slowly. If you look at his early games in the season, he didn't cross 70 yards receiving until the Texas game, which was the fourth game of the year, and had quite a few really quiet games all the way up until the Kansas State game where he had 4 catches for 64 yards. He only had one game with more than 70 yards before then. That was against Texas. Other than that, all of his games, he had no more than 2 catches. And then down the stretch of the season, he really came on strong. 4 catches for 64 yards against Kansas State. He had 6 for 36 against Oklahoma, 9 catches for 175 yards against Iowa State, and then a rough game against Oklahoma State. But if you remember back to that game, that was a real weak point for Texas Tech as they struggled to get any sort of passing game going down with Donovan Smith, and then had 3 catches for 72 yards in the bowl game against Mississippi State. So Myles Price is someone that really came on strong last season. He started getting more and more reps in the slot as the season progressed, and that is something that I think is going to be really important to look at going into this season because he now comes in as the de facto leader. And if you look at what is going on in the slot beyond just Price, you're really looking at just a couple of guys that are coming into the pro or they're coming back to the receiver room. Guys like Xavier White returns as a slot receiver, and as well as that, you're going to have Darius Townsend as well coming in that position. And then really, I mean, you're just talking about a team that in general doesn't have a ton of depth in the slot, at least compared to the outside position, which is where you really see a lot of the younger guys. But Price, really, I would suspect, is going to be the main guy in the slot. And if you run 4 wide sets, you might have some more Xavier White and Darius Townsend touches. And then as well as that, you could see some emerging faces over the course of the year. I mean, we saw quite a bit of production from Nehemiah Martinez in the spring game. I think he's a guy that could be worth watching as well, but certainly Price is going to be the guy that stands out. He had a bunch of production last year. If you look back to what he did in 2020 as well, he showed spurts, especially in the West Virginia game. And just in general, he looks like a guy that I think is really going to be someone that is worth watching. Another guy that might be worth watching as well is Jordan Brown, the KU transfer. He's someone that comes in with some experience that might be worth watching. But, I mean, if you look at what he's been able to do, I would still say Price, it would be expected to slot in as the main slot guy. But coming up next, I'm going to take a look at the outside receivers because there are a lot of them in the program and a lot of guys that could have major impacts, from guys like Brady Boyd transferring in to J.J. Sparkman. There's a couple more in there that I really think are primed for a good season. We're going to touch on that next. But first, here's a message from our good friends at Rock Auto. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it is now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on your computer, choosing only the brand that the warehouse happens to carry? You have access to both computers and phones, and whatever you need, all of them will have rockauto.com and the website, so you can easily find that. So it really is just an easy choice. You can save time and money going to Rock Auto. They have all the parts you need. It's a family business that's been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. It's easy to access, and the prices are reliably low for every single customer. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know that we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Which NFL stars move the betting line the most? Starting July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline and our good friends. July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And just a reminder, if you have not subscribed to Locked On Texas Tech on YouTube, please do that. I really appreciate all the support we've been getting, but we are getting close to 500 subscribers. That is a big mark for me. And I've got some cool content coming up. I already mentioned I'm going to be doing a crossover with Jonathan Davis in the coming days. We're also going to have another crossover with NC State. I'm looking forward to possibly doing a couple of guest appearances as well with some more guys coming on. So stay tuned for that. There's a lot of cool content coming onto the Locked On Texas Tech YouTube. Plus, you can see my face. You can see any sort of changes I have in my background. Apologies for the sun today. It's very bright outside. But in the meantime, talking about the receivers and some guys with a really bright future that we're talking about, you have to start out with the outside receivers here with Willie Fonji, Trey Cleveland, Jerome Bradley, and J.J. Sparkman. The latter two are guys that really showed out in the bowl game. J.J. Sparkman had a really nice touchdown catch, a contested touchdown against Mississippi State. And that really sort of was a little bit of a surprise to see him have some production, considering he was maybe the most unheralded of the 2020 receivers, at least compared to Fonji. He struggled to get any sort of playing time early on in the season, but he came on strong late in the year. 3 catches for 37 yards and a touchdown against Oklahoma, and a jump ball touchdown, another jump ball against Mississippi State as part of his 2 catches for 29 yards. He didn't even cross 100 yards for the season, but yet, if you look at what he was able to do in the bowl game and his contested catch potential, I think there is a lot to work with there. So Sparkman is the first guy that is really worth watching. Then you've got Jerome Bradley, a really highly touted freshman. There are questions about would he stay along with the program. Those questions were answered. He did stay. Jalen Tyson coming in, one of his best friends, is another reason why he decided to stay as well. And Bradley last season as a 4-star coming in looked like he was going to be maybe not getting much action. He did play in 3 games, or it might have been 4 games. But he recorded stats in 3 games against FIU, West Virginia, and Mississippi State. The key one there, though, is the Mississippi State game. He had 2 catches for 64 yards and one really nice 52-yard catch in that game. And that just shows his downfield potential. He's a really athletic 6'5" body. If you're looking at a comparison from past Texas Tech wide receivers, I would say his body type has a lot of TJ Vasher in him. Now, obviously, Vasher was extremely long, a little bit taller, but the same sort of agility applies. I really think that Bradley's lack of stiffness is really going to help out when it comes to catch and run situations. And if you're looking at the most raw talent in this receiver room, there's a good shot that it might be Jerome Bradley. So we're interested to see what he's able to do. And then you've got 2 of the more reliable guys. You've got Trey Cleveland. This is coming into his 4th year in the program, I believe. He got some action in 2020 before 2021. We saw him redshirted in 2019. So he is no stranger to Texas Tech football. And last year, he didn't have really the flashy games like a Sparkman or like a Bradley did. But what he did have was consistent, reliable production. He actually had a catch in 7 games last year, which for a guy that only ended up with 11 total, it's pretty impressive. He was strong in intermediate routes. You could see his ability to run routes on the outside was something that I think kind of sets him apart a little bit from more of the raw talented receivers that we have in Tech's receiving room. But Cleveland's a guy that I don't know how many people are really that high on him just because he's not really one of the flashy guys, didn't really have a ton of promise as a recruit. I was high on him as a deep ball catcher back then, and I still think he has quite a bit of athleticism. It's just compared to the other receivers, he doesn't quite have the flashiness that they have, but still, I mean, you're looking at a guy that has catches in 11 games as a Red Raider. That is impressive. He's obviously got the talent to play going forward, so that's something that is going to be worth watching. I don't know if he's going to be winning out the position at the outside again, as we'll get into. This is a really stacked position group, but Trey Cleveland, I mean, last year, the highlight of his year was the touchdown catch against FIU. He made a couple really nice catches in conference play as well. So I would expect him to factor in, again, a really good intermediate route guy. And that brings you to like Fungi, who is the last of the returnees on the outside that is really notable. And Fungi is an interesting one because if you look at what he was able to do in 2020 when he came in as a recruit, there's a lot of reason to be promising. Again, high 4-star recruit, but yet in 2020, he kind of got outclassed a little bit by Jalen Polk, who came in and really had a strong impact. Obviously, we now know Polk transferred to Washington after that season, so that really sucked to see. But Fungi's highlight of that season was an incredible catch against Oklahoma State, where he had 31-yard catch. Barrett somehow was able to extend to get it. And then that was really kind of the one highlight from that season where he redshirted, only appeared in 4 games. But then in 2021, you really saw what he could do early on in the season. I mean, catch against FIU. We saw against Texas a really long, nice catch and run touchdown against the Longhorns where he caught a pass, ran 69 yards for a touchdown, and then had another deep ball against West Virginia. I believe it was on a trick play. I'll have to check that real quick, but certainly Fungi's a guy that has been a downhill threat on multiple occasions for Texas Tech, but he hasn't been able to put the consistency in that we might have expected from him. And then if I remember correctly as well, after that West Virginia game, I think he might have had a little bit of issues. Obviously, against TCU, he was able to contribute against Kansas, but it seemed like he might have had some kind of injury after the KU game that really sort of limited him last year. So with that in mind, and with the fact that he has struggled a little bit with consistency, we saw him have a couple of drops as well over the course of the last season. Fungy's a guy that I think is going to have to improve his consistency a little bit. But much like Jerome Bradley, the talent is clearly there. I mean, he's someone who makes spectacular catches. He has the athleticism to have significant yards after catch, and we can see what he can do as a receiver. And his recruiting profile shows a guy that has a ton of raw talent. I think that there's all the reason in the world to expect that Fungi could factor in. And then you bring on the last guy, Brady Boyd. Really interesting guy to talk about because he is one of the most talented transfers that Texas Tech has had in recent memory. But if you look at what he was able to do in Minnesota in his first destination, he really only had 2 catches for 18 yards, appeared in 4 games. So he did get redshirted there. One of the most storied high school careers ever in Southlake, alongside Quinn Ewers, who we'll talk about tomorrow. A little bit of an upcoming preview for the Locked On Longhorns crossover, but you are not going to want to miss that. But Brady Boyd struggled to get on the field in Minnesota. Culturally, reportedly wasn't much of a fit. He's much more of a West Texas type of guy. And he's, by all accounts, showed out in spring practice, had a ton of really nice catches there. Looked good in the spring game. His ability to get open on routes is impressive as well. I'm not sure exactly how much he's going to factor in the outside versus the inside. I know in the spring game, he got quite a bit of run as an outside receiver. But again, with the logjam and the fact that Zach Kelly brings in a system that allows you to have a little bit of fluctuation between the outside and the inside guys, I would expect that that is something to monitor. So Boyd is someone that I could see in theory having massive production. But again, you have 5 guys here that all have a chance of establishing themselves as one of the main receivers for Texas Tech. And I'm excited to see how it goes because I really do think that this is going to be one of the most intriguing position groups on the entire team. And not just because of the fact that the receivers are likely to get a lot of opportunities, but also, I mean, this is a room with 5 really talented guys on the outside. And then you throw in Price, Xavier White, Tre'Davious Townsend on the inside. That is 8 receivers out there that have a ton of athleticism and natural skill. So it's going to be exciting to watch. But coming up next, I'm going to do my best job of predicting how I see the logjam working out and who I think will lead the Red Raiders in the 2022 season, as well as a quick look at our tight ends, because I think that's worth mentioning. But first, I've got a message from Built Bar. From the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built have given coconut brownie chunk the Puffs treatment. That's right, the coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love, and a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. But stop drilling and listening, and listen. They are good for you. Not only do they taste delicious, but they also have low calories, low sugar, and high protein. But they're only here for a limited time. So go to built.com to make sure that you don't miss out. They're going fast because not only do they taste amazing, but they are also extremely healthy for you. And so really just taking a look at the Built Bar, it is incredible taking a look at the coconut brownie chunk bar puffs. I mean, I can attest to this. I've tried them. I've tried the puffs. They are amazing. So if you want to try them while they're here, go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 at built.com and try out the coconut brownie chunk Built puffs right now. Back again talking about Texas Tech's wide receivers heading into the 2022 football season. And we've looked at all the names, and I want to talk about a couple more guys real quickly before we get into my predictions and who I think is going to lead this team in receiving yards, because I really do think that this year it's all up for grabs. And the second leading receiver from last season coming back is actually Mason Tharp, and he looks to be the de facto number 1 at the tight end position. You also bring back, as well as that, Henry Teeter as well. And Tharp is someone that I really feel like his size gives him a big advantage in the red zone, but also his athleticism is very impressive as well. I think that if you're looking at a receiver from that tight end position, it's definitely going to be Mason Tharp. Would not be surprised if he gets somewhere in the avenue of a 25 to 30 reception season. That might be even cutting him a little bit short. But the other guy that came into the program this offseason, I actually made an episode on it, was Baylor Cupp. He is another tight end, a transfer from Texas A&M. really good receiver, someone that had a lot of hype coming into him, and as a 4-star recruit to Texas A&M. Unfortunately, injuries, suspensions, everything kind of kept him off the field. But he's a good blocking tight end. He has the versatility of a Tharp. And I don't think he'll necessarily supplant Tharp as the number one option at tight end, but certainly is someone that could have a massive impact. Sorry if you hear the ringtone going off in the background. I can't control that. But in the meantime, that's really all of the names and faces. So you have 10 guys that have been covered here that I really do think have a shot at getting at least 20 to 30 catches. One of them's got to lead the team in receiving. And I ran this poll on the Locked On Texas Tech Twitter account. If you are not following it already, please do so. I'm going to be doing the polls throughout the previews you've already seen for the quarterbacks, the receivers, as well as all the game previews I've had for predictions. But I really do think the 70% of the people said that Myles Price would end up leading the team in receiving. And that's not a bad shout. Myles Price comes back as your leading receiver returning from last year. He's likely to get the most snaps just by default because the slot isn't quite as congested as what we see on the outside. And I mean, just watch Myles Price play football. He's good at catching at all three levels, good after the catch. He can be utilized on jet sweeps and just about anything. So that's going to be a good reason to pick Myles Price as your number one receiver. But I really do think that there's a possibility that he doesn't end up leading the team in receiving. And I think it comes down to the fact that in a vacuum, he's not necessarily more talented than any of the other receivers Tech has. I mean, you have an embarrassment of riches there. You have J.J. Sparkman. You have Lake Fungi. You have Trey Cleveland. You have Jerome Bradley as well. So all four of those guys on the outside, add in Brady Boyd, they're going to be just as talented in theory. I mean, we've seen flashes from all of them. And in the event that one or two of them have some sort of injury or ailment that might keep them out, or in the event that one of them really sticks out, the outside receiver under Zach Kittley has had quite a bit of usage. And if you remember back to last season with Western Kentucky, it was a distributed market for touches. And if there's one thing that Price has, is the sheer amount of touches he's going to get. But those receivers are really good at catching balls downhill or downfield. And with the manufactured increase in production on the short game for those outside receivers, I could easily see a world where a guy like Jerome Bradley ends up leading the team in receiving. And so for my official pick of who's going to lead the team in receiving, I think it's going to be Myles Price, just because as of now, we don't have a clear picture of who's going to start on the outside. We don't know exactly how Kittley's going to rotate in the receivers. I would expect that you're going to see a pretty heavy rotation early on in the season as we start to see kind of those guys play itself out. But certainly you don't know exactly how that's going to play out. So it's going to be interesting to watch. I think Price is a good shout to lead the team in receiving, but with the amount of talent Tech has on the outside, it would not surprise me to see any of those other guys. I do think this is going to be a season where you get a 1,000-yard receiver in Price, and depending on the quarterback, you might sneak in a second 1,000-yard receiver as well. I'm going to go for day one starters being Brady Boyd, Myles Price. I could see, as well as that, Trey Cleveland starting just kind of off of default and the experience he has within the program. And then if Kittley opts to start a fourth wide receiver in the slot, I think that's going to go down to either Xavier White, or you might shift Boyd over there and then start a guy like a Fungi or like a Jerome Bradley on the outside. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think that certainly the wide receiver position has a ton of talent. I've covered that already today. I think that it's going to be an ever-evolving situation, and having that many strong guys and good faces in the program is a good thing to have. It's going to allow for a very, very explosive offense if things get running right. So that wraps up the receiver preview. Again, if you have not already checked out the quarterback and the running back previews, do check that out. I will try to link a link in the description of this video, as well as you can check it out on the YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to take a look at my Twitter account or the Locked On Texas Tech Twitter account, you can follow me on Twitter at Eraser41. I've been posting a few of our videos on there over the last day or so, just to kind of bring people back into YouTube, just in case you haven't seen those, as well as the Locked On Texas Tech Twitter account at Locked On TTU. That's where you can find the polls for the game, a little bit of announcements, as well as posting a bunch of our podcasts. So that's been all for today. I appreciate you guys listening. I'm going to be back tomorrow with a special guest covering the Texas preview, and that is going to be an interesting one. If you remember back to last year, Texas Tech lost 70-35 in that game. We don't want that to happen again. I don't think that's going to happen again, but we're going to talk about it tomorrow. So in the meantime, Thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. You can get more on the Big 12 by making Locked On Big 12 your second listen. Every day, host Josh Neighbors and the local experts of Locked On take you across the Big 12 in 30 minutes. Locked On Big 12, you can make it your second listen today. Again, that is the Locked On Big 12 channel hosted by my good friend Josh Neighbors. Tomorrow, we'll talk Texas Tech. We'll talk Texas. It'll be great. But in the meantime, have a good night, and I will see you.